Captain Marcus Blackwood had served at the palace gates for 12 years. His uniform was always perfect, his sword sharp, and his loyalty to King Edmund absolute. Every morning at dawn, he would take his position at the eastern gate, watching over the grand entrance to the royal palace of Alderia. The kingdom of Alderia was known for its peaceful ways and prosperous lands. King Edmund was loved by his people, and the royal family lived in harmony with their subjects. Marcus had witnessed many celebrations, royal processions, and diplomatic visits during his time as captain of the royal guard. He had also seen his share of troubles, attempted thefts, suspicious visitors, and the occasional drunk citizen causing problems at the gates. On this particular autumn morning, the air was crisp and golden leaves danced in the wind. Marcus stood tall at his post, his brown eyes scanning the courtyard and the road leading to the palace. His fellow guards, Thomas and William, were positioned at the other gates. The three men had worked together for years and trusted each other completely. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Marcus noticed the usual morning activities beginning around the palace. Servants hurried about their duties, merchants arrived with daily supplies, and nobles came and went on their business. Everything seemed normal and peaceful. Around mid-morning, Marcus heard a sound that made him pause. It was soft at first, almost lost in the gentle breeze rustling through the oak trees that lined the palace grounds. He tilted his head, listening more carefully. The sound came again, a quiet sobbing, like someone crying. Marcus looked around the courtyard but saw nothing unusual. The crying seemed to be coming from somewhere near the stone wall that surrounded the palace gardens. He remained at his post, as his duty required, but kept listening. The sound continued, growing slightly louder. His training told him to stay at the gate, but something about the crying bothered him. It sounded young and frightened. As a guard, Marcus had developed good instincts about when something was wrong. This crying was not the sound of an adult in distress, but something more innocent and vulnerable. The sobbing continued for several minutes. Marcus glanced toward the other guards, but they were too far away to hear what he was hearing. He made a decision that went against his usual strict adherence to protocol. He would investigate the source of the crying, but only briefly. Marcus stepped away from his post and walked toward the garden wall. As he got closer, the crying became clearer. It was definitely a child, and whoever it was sounded truly upset. He followed the sound around the corner of the wall, where a large rosebush created a small hidden alcove. There, sitting on the ground with her back against the stone wall, was a little girl. She appeared to be about 7 years old, with long dark hair that fell in tangles around her face. Her dress was simple but clean, made of brown wool that suggested she came from a common family rather than nobility. Her small shoulders shook as she cried, and she held something clutched tightly in her hands. Marcus knelt down a few feet away from the child, making sure not to frighten her further. His voice was gentle when he spoke. "Hello there, little one. Are you hurt?" The girl looked up at him with large, tear-filled eyes. They were the deepest blue Marcus had ever seen, almost like sapphires. For a moment, she just stared at him, as if trying to decide whether she could trust this tall man in armor. "I'm Captain Marcus," he said softly. "I'm here to help. Can you tell me what's wrong?" The girl wiped her nose with the back of her hand and sniffled. "Are you really a guard?" she asked in a small voice. "Yes, I am. See my uniform and my sword? I protect the palace and everyone around it. That includes you." Marcus kept his voice calm and reassuring. The child looked at his uniform more carefully, taking in the royal crest on his chest and the polished armor on his arms. She seemed to relax slightly. "My name is Elena," she said quietly. "That's a beautiful name, Elena. Can you tell me why you're crying? Are you lost?" Elena shook her head. "I'm not lost. I came here on purpose. But I'm scared." "What are you scared of?" The girl looked around nervously, as if checking to make sure no one else could hear them. Then, she looked back at Marcus with those striking blue eyes. "I have something very important to tell someone in the palace. But I don't know who to trust." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Something in the child's voice told him this was not a simple matter of a lost toy or a scraped knee. There was a seriousness in her young face that seemed beyond her years. "What kind of important thing?" he asked gently. Elena looked down at her hands, which were still clutched tightly around something Marcus couldn't see. "It's about the king. Someone wants to hurt him." The words hit Marcus like a punch to the stomach. In 12 years of service, he had never heard a direct threat against King Edmund. The king was beloved by his people. Who would want to harm him? "Elena, this is very serious. Can you tell me more about what you heard?" The girl's tears started fresh. "I was hiding in our cottage yesterday when some men came to talk to my father. They didn't see me because I was in the loft where I sometimes play. They thought I was outside." Marcus listened intently as Elena continued her story. "The men were angry with my father about something. They said he owed them money, lots of money. My father said he didn't have it, and he asked for more time." "What did the men say then?" "One of them, the leader, he had a mean voice. He told my father there was a way to pay off the debt. He said there was going to be a big celebration at the palace next week, and that my father could help them get inside." Marcus felt his blood grow cold. Next week was indeed the Harvest Festival, one of the biggest celebrations of the year. The palace would be filled with guests, and security would be complex with so many people coming and going. "What else did they say, Elena?" "The mean man said they were going to hurt the king during the festival. He said if my father helped them, his debt would be forgiven." "But if he didn't help?" Elena's voice broke. "What did they say would happen if he didn't help?" "They said they would hurt me and my mother." Elena began crying harder. "My father was so scared. I heard him agree to help them." Marcus felt a mixture of anger and sympathy. Elena's father was clearly being blackmailed into participating in a plot against the king. The poor man was probably desperate to protect his family. "Elena, do you know who these men were? Did you recognize any of them?" The girl shook her head. "I never saw them before. But I heard one of them call the leader Lord Garrett." Marcus's eyes widened. Lord Garrett Thornfield was a nobleman who had been exiled from the kingdom 2 years ago for trying to cheat the royal treasury. If he was back and planning revenge against King Edmund, this was an extremely serious threat. "Elena, what you've told me is very important. You did the right thing by coming here. But what about my father? He's not a bad man. He just owes money because our crops failed last season and my mother was sick. He borrowed money to pay for her medicine." Marcus reached out and gently patted Elena's shoulder. "We'll figure out how to help your family too. But first, I need to make sure the king is safe." Elena nodded and slowly opened her hands. Inside was a small piece of parchment, folded several times. One of the men dropped this when they were leaving. "I found it after they went away." Marcus carefully took the parchment and unfolded it. His heart sank as he read the contents. It was a detailed map of the palace, with specific rooms marked and notes about guard rotations. Someone had been planning this attack for a long time. "Elena, you may have saved the king's life by bringing this to me." "Really? Really? You're a very brave little girl." Elena smiled for the first time since Marcus had found her. "Will you really help my family?" "I promise I will do everything I can. But first, I need to take this information to my commander immediately." Marcus stood up and looked back toward his post at the gate. He had been away for longer than he should have been. His duty was to remain at his position, but he now had information that could save the king's life. He faced an impossible choice. If he returned to his post and waited for his shift to end before reporting what Elena had told him, the delay could be dangerous. But if he abandoned his post to report immediately, he would be violating direct orders and could face serious punishment. "Elena, I need you to stay right here for a few more minutes. Don't go anywhere, and don't let anyone see you. Can you do that?" The girl nodded. "What are you going to do?" Marcus looked at the parchment in his hands, then, at the innocent face of the child who had risked everything to bring him this warning. He thought about King Edmund, who had always been kind to his guards and fair to his people. He thought about Elena's father, trapped between protecting his family and betraying his king. The decision became clear. Some things were more important than following orders exactly. The safety of the king and the kingdom had to come first. "I'm going to make sure the right people know about this threat immediately," Marcus told Elena. "Even if it means I get in trouble for leaving my post." Elena's eyes widened. "You would do that for us?" Marcus knelt down one more time and looked directly into those remarkable blue eyes. "Elena, sometimes doing the right thing means taking risks. You took a big risk coming here to warn us about the danger to the king. Now it's my turn to take a risk to make sure your warning reaches the right people. But won't you get in trouble?" "Maybe. But keeping the king safe is more important than following every rule perfectly." Marcus stood and adjusted his sword belt. He had made his decision. He would take Elena to the captain of the palace guard immediately, even if it meant facing disciplinary action for abandoning his post. "Come on, Elena. We're going to see some very important people." As they walked together toward the palace, Marcus felt the weight of the decision he was making. In 12 years of perfect service, he had never once left his post without permission. But he had also never faced a situation like this. Elena walked beside him, her small hand trustingly placed in his large, armored one. She had shown incredible courage in coming to warn them about the plot against the king. The least he could do was show equal courage in making sure her warning was heard. Behind them, the eastern gate stood unguarded for the first time in Marcus's career. Ahead of them lay the greatest test of his loyalty and judgment. As they approached the palace doors, Marcus said a silent prayer that he was making the right choice. The little girl with the sapphire eyes had delivered a message that would change everything. Now it was up to him to make sure that message reached the king in time to save his life. Marcus and Elena walked through the palace corridors with determined steps. The sound of their footsteps echoed off the marble floors as they made their way toward the central command room where Captain Aldrich, the head of all palace guards, would be conducting his morning briefings. Elena stayed close to Marcus, her small hand still gripping his. The palace was much grander than anything she had ever seen. Tall windows let in streams of golden sunlight that illuminated tapestries depicting the history of Alderia. Portraits of past kings and queens lined the walls, their painted eyes seeming to watch as the unlikely pair passed by. "It's so big," Elena whispered, her voice filled with wonder despite her fear. "The palace has been home to the royal family for over 300 years, Marcus explained, trying to keep her calm. Each king has added something new to make it more beautiful." They passed several servants who looked curiously at the sight of a palace guard escorting a common child through the halls. Marcus nodded politely but didn't stop to explain. Time was precious, and he needed to deliver Elena's warning as quickly as possible. As they approached the command room, Marcus could hear the familiar voice of Captain Aldrich giving instructions to the morning shift guards. The captain was a stern but fair man who had served the crown for 25 years. Marcus respected him greatly, but he also knew that Aldrich was strict about protocol and discipline. Marcus paused outside the heavy wooden door and looked down at Elena. "When we go inside, there will be several guards and officers. Don't be frightened. Just tell them exactly what you told me." Elena nodded, though Marcus could see she was nervous. "Will they believe me? I'm just a little girl." "The truth is the truth, no matter who speaks it," Marcus assured her. "And you have proof." He patted the pocket where he had placed the map Elena had found. Marcus took a deep breath and knocked on the door. Captain Aldrich's voice called out, "Enter." They walked into the room, and immediately all conversation stopped. Captain Aldrich, a tall man with graying hair and sharp green eyes, looked up from the duty roster he was reviewing. Around the room, 5 other officers turned to stare at the unexpected sight of Marcus with a child. "Captain Blackwood," Aldrich said, his voice carrying a note of surprise and displeasure. "Why are you not at your assigned post? And who is this child?" Marcus straightened his shoulders and spoke with clear conviction. "Sir, I have urgent information regarding a threat to the king's safety. This is Elena, and she has brought us a warning about a plot against His Majesty." The room fell completely silent. Captain Aldrich set down his papers and studied Marcus's face carefully. "This is highly irregular, Captain. You know the protocols for reporting threats." "Yes, sir, I do. But the circumstances are exceptional. Elena has information about a planned attack during the Harvest Festival, and she has physical evidence." Captain Aldrich's expression grew serious. Any threat to the king was treated with the utmost gravity. "Very well. Tell me what you know." Elena stepped forward, though she stayed close to Marcus. In a clear, brave voice, she repeated the story she had told him earlier. She described hiding in the loft of her family's cottage and overhearing the men threatening her father. She spoke about Lord Garrett and the plan to infiltrate the palace during the festival. As Elena spoke, Marcus watched the faces of the officers around the room. He saw their initial skepticism gradually change to concern and, then, to alarm. When Elena finished her account, Captain Aldrich's face was grim. "You mentioned physical evidence," the captain said. Marcus pulled the folded parchment from his pocket and handed it to Captain Aldrich. "Elena found this after the conspirators left. One of them dropped it." The captain unfolded the map and examined it carefully. His expression darkened as he studied the detailed markings and notes. He passed it to Lieutenant Morrison, his second-in-command, who also examined it with growing concern. "This is definitely a map of the palace," Lieutenant Morrison confirmed. "And these markings show detailed knowledge of our security arrangements." Captain Aldrich looked back at Elena. "Child, you said one of the men was called Lord Garrett. Are you certain of that name?" Elena nodded. "Yes, sir. I heard it very clearly." The captain exchanged meaningful looks with his officers. Everyone in the palace guard knew about Lord Garrett Thornfield's exile and his bitter feelings toward King Edmund. "Captain Blackwood," Aldrich said, turning back to Marcus. "You abandoned your post to bring me this information. You know this is a serious breach of protocol." Marcus felt his stomach tighten, but he met the captain's gaze steadily. "Yes, sir. I understand the seriousness of my actions. But I believe the threat to the king's life took precedence over normal protocol." "And what of your post?" "The eastern gate has been left unguarded. I take full responsibility for that decision, sir. I judged that getting this warning to you immediately was more important than maintaining my position." Captain Aldrich was quiet for a long moment, studying Marcus's face. The other officers waited tensely to see how their commanding officer would respond to this unprecedented situation. Finally, the captain spoke. "Lieutenant Morrison, send guards to secure the eastern gate immediately. Then, dispatch a patrol to investigate Elena's cottage and locate her father. We need to understand the full scope of this threat." "Yes, sir," Morrison replied, already moving toward the door. "Captain Blackwood, your decision to leave your post was highly irregular. However, if this threat is real, your quick thinking may have saved the king's life. The situation is too serious to worry about protocol violations at the moment." Marcus felt a wave of relief, though he knew he wasn't completely out of trouble yet. Captain Aldrich turned his attention back to Elena. "Young lady, you've shown remarkable courage in coming forward with this information. But now we need to make sure you're safe. If these conspirators discover that their plot has been exposed, they might try to harm you or your family." Elena's eyes widened with fear. "Will they hurt my mother and father?" "Not if we can help it," the captain assured her. "We're going to take steps to protect your family. But first, I need you to tell me everything else you can remember about these men." Elena thought carefully, her young face scrunched in concentration. "There were 4 of them. Lord Garrett was the leader. He was tall with dark hair and a beard. He had a scar on his hand." "What kind of scar?" Lieutenant Morrison asked, having returned from dispatching the guards. It looked like a burn mark, right here, Elena said, pointing to the back of her left hand. Marcus saw the officers exchange glances. The description matched what they knew about Lord Garrett, who had been injured in a fire during his youth. "What about the other men?" Captain Aldrich asked. One was very fat with a red face. Another was thin and kept looking around nervously. The fourth man was younger, maybe like my father's age. He didn't talk much, but he had a sword. Elena continued to provide details about the conversation she had overheard. She remembered that the men planned to return to her father's cottage in 2 days to finalize their plans. They intended to use her father's job delivering supplies to the palace as a way to smuggle weapons inside. "What does your father deliver to the palace?" Captain Aldrich asked. "Vegetables and grain from our farm and the other farms nearby. He brings them to the palace kitchens twice a week." Lieutenant Morrison nodded. "I know him. Robert of Millfield. He's been delivering supplies here for years. Always seemed like an honest man." "He is honest," Elena said quickly, tears starting to form in her eyes again. "He only agreed to help them because they threatened to hurt us. He's a good father." Captain Aldrich's expression softened slightly. "We understand, Elena. Your father is in a very difficult position. But now that we know about the plot, we can help him and catch these criminals at the same time." "How?" Marcus asked. "We'll set a trap," the captain explained. "When the conspirators return to finalize their plans with Robert, we'll be waiting for them." "Elena, do you know exactly when they're supposed to come back?" "The day after tomorrow, in the evening after the sun goes down." "Perfect. That gives us time to prepare." Captain Aldrich turned to his officers. "Gentlemen, we have a complex situation here. We need to protect Elena's family, catch the conspirators, and ensure the king's safety during the festival." Lieutenant Morrison stepped forward. "Sir, should we inform His Majesty about the threat?" "Not yet. We need more information first. If we act too quickly, the conspirators might escape. We'll proceed carefully and methodically." Captain Aldrich looked around the room at his officers. "This information doesn't leave this room until I give the order. We can't risk word getting back to Lord Garrett that we know about his plot." Everyone nodded in agreement. "Now, Elena," the captain said, kneeling down to her level. "We're going to take you somewhere safe. You've done wonderfully by bringing us this warning, but now we need to make sure you're protected." "What about my mother? She doesn't know where I am. She'll be worried." "We'll send word to her that you're safe," Marcus promised. "And we'll make sure she's protected too." Captain Aldrich stood and addressed his men. "Lieutenant Morrison, I want you to personally escort Elena to the safe chambers in the North Tower. Post 2 guards outside her room at all times." "Yes, sir." "Sergeant Williams, take 3 men and ride to Millfield Village. Find Elena's mother and bring her here quietly. Tell her only that her daughter is safe and that we need to protect the family for a few days." "Understood, sir." "Captain Blackwood, I want you to return to your post, but first, write out a detailed report of everything Elena told you. Include every detail you can remember." Marcus nodded. "Yes, sir." "And, sir, what about disciplinary action for abandoning my post?" Captain Aldrich looked at him seriously. "That will be addressed after this crisis is resolved. For now, your quick thinking is more important than protocol violations." As the officers began to disperse to carry out their assignments, Elena tugged on Marcus's armor. "Captain Marcus, will I see you again?" Marcus knelt down and took her small hand in his. "Yes, Elena. I promise you will. And I promise that we'll do everything we can to keep your family safe." Elena smiled, showing the first signs of hope since Marcus had found her crying by the garden wall. "Thank you for believing me. Thank you for being brave enough to come forward. You're a hero, Elena." As Lieutenant Morrison gently led Elena away toward the North Tower, Marcus watched her go with a mixture of admiration and concern. The little girl had set in motion a chain of events that would test everyone involved. The next few days would be crucial in determining whether they could stop Lord Garrett's plot and save the king's life. Marcus left the command room to return to his post and write his report. His mind was already working on the details of what needed to be done. The harvest festival was only 5 days away, and they had to be ready for anything. As he walked back through the palace corridors, Marcus reflected on the morning's events. He had made a decision that went against 12 years of perfect protocol adherence, but he felt certain it was the right choice. Sometimes, loyalty meant more than just following orders. Sometimes, it meant risking everything to protect what mattered most. The little girl with the sapphire eyes had changed everything. Now it was up to all of them to make sure her courage hadn't been in vain. 2 days passed in a whirlwind of careful planning and secret preparations. Marcus had returned to his duties at the eastern gate, but his mind remained focused on the impending confrontation with Lord Garrett's conspirators. The palace buzzed with its usual activities, but beneath the surface, a select group of guards worked quietly to prepare their trap. Elena had been settled comfortably in the North Tower with her mother, Anna, who had arrived the previous day. Anna was a gentle woman with the same striking blue eyes as her daughter. When she learned what Elena had done, she was torn between pride and terror for her family's safety. "My brave little girl," Anna had whispered, holding Elena close. "You may have saved the kingdom, but you've put yourself in such danger." Captain Aldrich had personally assured Anna that the palace would protect her family. "Your husband will be safe too," he promised. "We have a plan to help him without putting him at greater risk." The plan was intricate and dangerous. When the conspirators returned to Robert's cottage that evening, a team of guards would be hiding nearby. They would allow the meeting to proceed long enough to gather information about the full extent of the plot, then move in to capture the criminals. Meanwhile, Robert himself was struggling with his impossible situation. He knew nothing about his daughter's heroic actions and believed he had no choice but to cooperate with Lord Garrett's demands. The poor farmer spent his days working his fields and his nights lying awake, sick with worry about what he was being forced to do. Marcus had volunteered to be part of the team that would apprehend the conspirators. Captain Aldrich had initially refused, saying that Marcus had already done enough and should maintain his normal duties. But Marcus had pressed his case. "Sir, I was the first to hear Elena's story. I feel responsible for seeing this through to the end. Your involvement has already been irregular enough, Captain Blackwood. I don't want to give the palace administrators more reasons to question your conduct. With respect, sir, Elena trusted me with this information. I want to be there to make sure she and her family are truly safe." Captain Aldrich had finally agreed, impressed by Marcus's dedication to the family that had risked everything to protect the king. As the sun began to set on the appointed day, Marcus joined Lieutenant Morrison and 4 other guards on the ride to Millfield Village. They wore dark clothing instead of their usual armor to avoid being spotted by the conspirators. Their horses' hooves had been wrapped with cloth to muffle the sound of their approach. The cottage where Elena's family lived was small but well-maintained, surrounded by fields of wheat and vegetables. Smoke rose from the chimney, and warm light glowed in the windows. It looked like a picture of peaceful rural life, but Marcus knew that inside, Robert was probably pacing with anxiety, dreading the arrival of his unwelcome visitors. The guards positioned themselves strategically around the cottage. Marcus and Lieutenant Morrison hid behind the large oak tree that stood near the front door. Sergeant Williams and 2 guards concealed themselves behind the barn. The remaining guard, Corporal Hayes, climbed into the loft of the barn where he could observe the entire area. They didn't have to wait long. As darkness fell, the sound of approaching horses reached their ears. 4 riders came down the country road, their silhouettes dark against the starlit sky. Marcus felt his heart begin to beat faster as he recognized the tension in Lieutenant Morrison beside him. The riders dismounted near the cottage and approached the front door. Marcus could see them clearly now in the light that spilled from the windows. The leader was tall and broad-shouldered, with a neatly trimmed beard. Even from a distance, Marcus could see the confidence and arrogance in the way he carried himself. This had to be Lord Garrett. One of the other men matched Elena's description of the fat man with the red face. He wheezed slightly as he walked, clearly not accustomed to physical activity. The thin, nervous man kept looking around suspiciously, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. The fourth man was younger and moved with the fluid grace of an experienced fighter. Lord Garrett knocked on the cottage door with sharp, commanding raps. After a moment, Robert opened it. Even from their hiding place, Marcus could see the fear and reluctance in the farmer's posture. "Good evening, Robert," Lord Garrett said in a voice that carried false warmth. "I trust you've had time to consider our proposal." "I have, my lord," Robert replied, his voice barely audible. "Excellent. May we come in? We have details to discuss." Robert stepped aside reluctantly, and the four conspirators entered the cottage. Through the window, Marcus could see them settling around Robert's small wooden table. Lord Garrett pulled out several documents and began spreading them across the surface. "This is it," Lieutenant Morrison whispered. "We need to get closer to hear what they're planning." The two men crept carefully toward the cottage, staying in the shadows cast by the moonlight. Marcus's training served him well as he moved silently across the ground, avoiding loose stones and dry leaves that might crackle underfoot. When they reached the wall of the cottage, they could hear voices through the thin wooden walls. Marcus pressed his ear to a gap between two boards and listened intently. "The festival begins in 3 days," Lord Garrett was saying. "The palace will be crowded with nobles, merchants, and common folk celebrating the harvest. Security will be complicated with so many people coming and going." "I still don't understand exactly what you want me to do," Robert said, his voice shaking slightly. "It's quite simple," the fat man replied with a harsh laugh. "You'll make your usual delivery to the palace kitchens on the morning of the festival. But, hidden among your vegetables will be weapons for us." "How will you get the weapons?" Robert asked. "That's not your concern," Lord Garrett said sharply. "Your only job is to deliver them to the agreed location and, then, stay out of our way." Marcus exchanged a meaningful look with Lieutenant Morrison. This confirmed Elena's information about using Robert's delivery route to smuggle weapons into the palace. "Once we have our weapons," the thin man added, "we'll move during the afternoon celebration. When the king makes his traditional speech from the great balcony, that's when we'll strike." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. The king's harvest festival speech was a beloved tradition. Every year, King Edmund would stand on the grand balcony overlooking the courtyard and address his people about the year's blessings and the promise of continued prosperity. The entire royal family would be present, along with hundreds of guests. "What about my family?" Robert asked. "You promised they would be safe if I helped you." "Your family will be perfectly safe as long as you do exactly what we tell you," Lord Garrett replied. "But, if you try to warn anyone or betray us in any way, the consequences will be severe." "I understand," Robert said quietly. "Good. Now, let's go over the details one more time." For the next 20 minutes, Marcus and Lieutenant Morrison listened as the conspirators outlined their plan. They learned that Lord Garrett had been planning his revenge for over a year, gathering supporters and resources. The weapons would be hidden in false bottoms of Robert's vegetable crates. 3 other conspirators were already inside the palace, working as temporary servants hired for the festival. The plan was to assassinate King Edmund during his speech, then take control of the palace in the chaos that would follow. Lord Garrett intended to declare himself the rightful ruler of Alderia, claiming that King Edmund had been a usurper. Marcus felt sick as he listened to the details of the plot. The conspirators had thought of everything, from escape routes to ways of dealing with the palace guards. If Elena hadn't overheard their conversation and brought the warning, the plan might well have succeeded. Finally, Lord Garrett seemed satisfied with their preparations. "Remember, Robert, your delivery is scheduled for dawn on the festival day. The kitchen staff will be busy with preparations and won't examine your goods as carefully as usual." "I'll be there," Robert promised reluctantly. "See that you are. And, remember, we'll be watching you. Any sign of betrayal, and your wife and daughter will suffer for it." Marcus saw Lieutenant Morrison tense at the threat. They both knew that Elena and Anna were safe in the palace, but Robert didn't know that. The poor farmer believed his family was still at risk. The conspirators began to prepare to leave. Marcus and Lieutenant Morrison crept back to their hiding place behind the oak tree and signaled to the other guards. The plan was to wait until the criminals were outside and away from Robert before making their move. Lord Garrett and his men emerged from the cottage and walked toward their horses. Marcus could see Robert standing in the doorway, his shoulders slumped with the weight of what he was being forced to do. "Remember," Lord Garrett called back to the farmer, "dawn on festival day. Don't disappoint us, Robert." As the conspirators mounted their horses, Lieutenant Morrison gave the signal. The guards emerged from their hiding places simultaneously, surrounding the four men before they could react. "By order of the Crown, you are all under arrest for treason and conspiracy against the king," Lieutenant Morrison announced, his sword drawn. For a moment, the conspirators seemed frozen with shock. Then, Lord Garrett's face twisted with rage and he reached for his sword. "Fight," he shouted to his men. "We can't let them take us alive." The next few moments were chaos. The fat man tried to spur his horse to flee but was quickly surrounded by Sergeant Williams and his men. The nervous thin man drew his sword but was clearly no match for the trained palace guards. The younger conspirator proved to be a skilled fighter. He leaped from his horse and engaged Corporal Hayes in a fierce sword fight that rang through the night air with the clash of steel on steel. Lord Garrett himself fought with desperate fury, knowing that capture meant certain execution for treason. He was a formidable opponent, his sword work polished from years of noble training. Marcus found himself facing the exiled lord directly. "You think you've won?" Lord Garrett snarled as their swords met. "This is just the beginning. There are others who will continue my work." "Your work ends tonight," Marcus replied grimly, pressing his attack. The fight was intense but brief. Marcus's 12 years of guard duty had kept him in excellent fighting condition, while Lord Garrett had grown soft during his exile. Soon, the former lord was disarmed and, on his knees, breathing hard. One by one, all four conspirators were captured. The thin man and the fat man surrendered quickly when they realized they were outnumbered. The younger fighter put up more resistance but was eventually overwhelmed by superior numbers. As the guards bound their prisoners with rope, Robert came running from his cottage. "Thank God," he said, tears of relief streaming down his face. "I thought I would have to go through with their terrible plan." "But how did you know?" Lieutenant Morrison looked at Marcus, who stepped forward to explain. "Your daughter Elena is a very brave girl, Robert. She overheard the conspirators threatening your family and came to warn us at the palace." Robert's face went pale. "Elena? But where is she? Is she safe? And what about my wife?" "They're both safe and, well, protected at the palace," Marcus assured him. "Elena may have saved the king's life with her courage." Robert sank to his knees, overwhelmed with emotion. "My little girl. I can't believe she did something so dangerous. What if these men had seen her?" "She was very careful," Marcus said gently. "And very determined to protect both her family and the king. You should be proud of her." As the guards prepared to transport their prisoners back to the palace, Lord Garrett looked up at Marcus with hatred burning in his eyes. "This isn't over," he said venomously. "Even if you've stopped me, others will continue the fight against that false king. King Edmund is the rightful ruler of Alderia, chosen by the people and blessed by God," Marcus replied. "Your bitterness has blinded you to the truth." Lord Garrett said nothing more, but his expression promised that his hatred would continue even from prison. Lieutenant Morrison organized the transportation of the prisoners while Marcus helped Robert prepare to reunite with his family. The danger was not completely over yet, they still needed to identify and capture the other conspirators who were already inside the palace. But the immediate threat had been neutralized. As they rode back toward the palace under the starlit sky, Marcus thought about the chain of events that had led to this moment. It had all started with a little girl's courage and a guard's decision to abandon his post when duty called him to something more important than protocol. The harvest festival was still 2 days away, and there was still work to be done to ensure the king's safety. But, thanks to Elena's bravery and the quick action of the palace guards, the kingdom would survive this threat to face many more years of peace and prosperity. Marcus looked forward to seeing Elena again and telling her that her courage had indeed saved the king and protected her family. The little girl with the sapphire eyes had proven that sometimes the smallest voices could make the biggest difference. The next morning dawned clear and bright as the palace bustled with activity preparing for the harvest festival. Word of the captured conspirators had spread quickly through the guard ranks, though the details were kept secret from the general population to avoid panic. King Edmund himself had been informed of the threat and was deeply grateful to the young girl who had risked everything to protect him. Marcus stood at his post at the eastern gate, but his mind kept drifting to the events of the previous night. The capture of Lord Garrett and his men had been successful, but Captain Aldrich's interrogation had revealed troubling information. There were indeed other conspirators already working inside the palace, just as they had feared. 3 men had been hired as temporary servants for the festival preparations. Their job was to help Lord Garrett and his companions once they gained entry with the smuggled weapons. Now, with the main conspirators captured, these inside agents were potentially even more dangerous. Desperate and trapped, they might attempt some foolish act of revenge. Captain Aldrich had decided to proceed with the festival as planned, but with additional security measures that wouldn't be obvious to the guests. Every temporary servant would be closely watched, and extra guards would be positioned throughout the palace in civilian clothes. Around midday, Marcus was approached by a young page who informed him that Captain Aldrich wanted to see him immediately. Marcus left his replacement guard at the gate and hurried to the command room. When he arrived, he found Captain Aldrich in deep conversation with Lieutenant Morrison and 2 other senior officers. The captain looked up as Marcus entered. "Captain Blackwood, we have developments regarding the remaining conspirators. Our interrogation of Lord Garrett has been productive." "What have you learned, sir?" The 3 inside agents are named Thomas Fletcher, William Crane, and David Stone. They're working in the kitchens and the Great Hall, helping with festival preparations. But here's the concerning part: Lord Garrett had a backup plan in case the main assassination attempt failed. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. "What kind of backup plan?" Lieutenant Morrison answered. "If the attack during the king's speech was unsuccessful, the inside agents were instructed to poison the royal family during the evening feast. They have access to the kitchen and could easily contaminate the food served to the high table." "Have we identified these men among the temporary staff?" "That's the problem," Captain Aldrich replied grimly. "Lord Garrett gave us their names, but we don't know what they look like. He recruited them through intermediaries and never met them personally. They could be any of the 30 temporary workers we hired for the festival." Marcus understood the magnitude of the challenge. With hundreds of guests expected for the evening feast and dozens of servants moving throughout the palace, identifying 3 unknown conspirators would be extremely difficult. "Sir, what about Elena?" Marcus asked. "She saw 4 men at her father's cottage. She might be able to identify them if she saw them again." Captain Aldrich nodded thoughtfully. "That's an excellent idea. We'll have Elena discreetly observe the temporary staff and see if she recognizes any of them. But we must be very careful not to put her in danger." "I could escort her personally," Marcus offered. "She trusts me, and I could make sure she stays safe." "Very well. But I want you to understand, Captain Blackwood, that this is highly irregular. Using a child as an informant goes against normal protocols." Marcus met the captain's stern gaze. "Sir, this entire situation has been irregular. Elena has already proven her courage and reliability. She may be our best chance to identify these men before they can harm the royal family." Captain Aldrich considered this for a moment. "You're right. These are extraordinary circumstances that require extraordinary measures." "Very well, fetch Elena and begin your investigation. But I want you to report back to me immediately if you identify any of the conspirators." Marcus left the command room and made his way to the North Tower where Elena and her family were staying. He found Elena playing a simple game with wooden blocks while her mother Anna sat nearby, mending clothes. Robert was there too, having been reunited with his family the previous night after giving a full statement about his forced involvement with the conspirators. When Elena saw Marcus enter the room, her face lit up with joy. "Captain Marcus! You came back! Hello, Elena! I told you I would see you again." Marcus smiled at the little girl, then addressed her parents. "Robert, Anna, I need to ask Elena to help us with something important. There may still be dangerous men in the palace, and Elena is the only one who might be able to recognize them." Anna immediately looked worried. "Is it dangerous? I don't want my daughter put in harm's way again." "I understand your concern," Marcus said gently. "But I promise I will personally ensure her safety every moment. And Elena's help could prevent these men from hurting the king or other innocent people." Robert spoke up. "Elena has already shown more courage than many adults. If she's willing to help, and if Captain Marcus can guarantee her safety, then I think we should let her." Anna looked at her husband, then at her daughter. Elena was listening to the conversation with serious attention, her young face showing that she understood the importance of what was being discussed. "I want to help," Elena said firmly. "The bad men threaten to hurt you and Papa. If I can stop them from hurting anyone else, I want to do it." Anna sighed and nodded reluctantly. "Very well. But you must promise to do exactly what Captain Marcus tells you." "I promise, Mama." Marcus knelt down to Elena's level. "Elena, I need you to walk through the palace with me and look at the servants who are preparing for the festival. If you see any of the men who came to your cottage, you must tell me immediately, but very quietly so they don't hear you." Elena nodded solemnly. "I understand. I'll be very careful." Marcus and Elena left the North Tower and began their careful investigation of the palace staff. They started in the kitchens, where dozens of temporary workers were busy preparing food for the evening feast. The massive kitchen was filled with the sounds of chopping, cooking, and bustling activity. Elena held Marcus's hand tightly as they walked through the kitchen, her young eyes scanning every face they passed. Marcus introduced her as his niece who was visiting the palace for the first time, wanting to see how the royal feast was prepared. The kitchen staff smiled at the little girl and continued their work. After spending nearly an hour in the kitchens without Elena recognizing anyone, they moved on to the great hall where other temporary workers were setting up tables and decorating for the evening's celebration. Again, Elena studied each face carefully, but found no one she recognized. They were beginning to check the servants working in the corridors when Elena suddenly squeezed Marcus's hand tightly. "Captain Marcus," she whispered urgently. "I see one of them." Marcus felt his heart begin to race, but he kept his voice calm and casual. "Where, Elena?" "The man with the brown hair carrying the wooden crates. He was one of the men who came to our cottage." Marcus looked in the direction Elena indicated and saw a man of medium height with brown hair and a thin build. He was carrying wooden crates that probably contained supplies for the festival. The man seemed nervous and kept looking around as if watching for something. "Are you certain it's him?" Marcus asked quietly. "Yes. He's the one who kept looking around nervously at our cottage. I remember his face." Marcus felt a surge of both excitement and anxiety. They had found one of the conspirators, but now they had to be very careful not to alert him that he had been identified. "Elena, we need to follow him carefully and see where he goes, but we must not let him know we're watching him. Can you be very quiet and stay close to me?" Elena nodded, her eyes wide but determined. Marcus and Elena followed the suspicious man at a distance as he made his way through the palace corridors. The man seemed to be heading toward the servants' quarters in the lower level of the palace. Marcus noted the route carefully, knowing that Captain Aldrich would need this information. The man entered a small chamber that was being used as temporary storage for festival supplies. Marcus waited outside with Elena, listening carefully. After a few minutes, they heard voices from inside the room. "The plan has changed," the man Elena had identified was saying. "Lord Garrett and the others have been captured. What? Another voice replied with alarm. How is that possible? Someone betrayed us. We need to implement the secondary plan immediately. Marcus strained to hear more details of their conversation. He counted at least 3 different voices, which matched the number of inside conspirators Lord Garrett had mentioned. The poison is ready, a third voice said. We can add it to the wine that will be served at the high table tonight. The entire royal family will be dead within hours. Good. After they're poisoned, we'll escape in the chaos. We have horses waiting outside the city. Marcus had heard enough. He needed to get this information to Captain Aldrich immediately, but he also needed to make sure the conspirators didn't escape before they could be captured. He knelt down and whispered to Elena. You've done perfectly, Elena. Now I need to get help to capture these men. I want you to go back to your parents right away. But what about you? What if they try to hurt you? Don't worry about me. I'm a palace guard, and I know how to handle dangerous situations. Your job is done, and you've done it brilliantly. Elena looked reluctant to leave, but she understood the importance of following Marcus's instructions. Will you tell me what happens? I promise I'll come see you later and tell you everything. Marcus quickly escorted Elena back toward the North Tower, then hurried to find Captain Aldrich. He located the captain in the Great Hall, inspecting the final preparations for the evening feast. Sir, we've found them, Marcus reported quietly. Elena identified one of the conspirators, and we followed him to their meeting place. All 3 are together, and they're planning to poison the royal wine tonight. Captain Aldrich's face grew grim. Where are they? In the supply chamber on the lower level, East Corridor. They're discussing their escape plans. Excellent work, Captain Blackwood. Take 4 guards and arrest them immediately. I'll inform the king that the final threat has been identified. Marcus selected 4 trusted guards and led them quickly to the supply chamber. They positioned themselves outside the room, then Marcus kicked open the door and announced, by order of the crown, you are under arrest for treason. The 3 conspirators were taken completely by surprise. 2 of them surrendered immediately, but the third, a large man with a scarred face, tried to fight his way out. The struggle was brief but intense, ending when Sergeant Williams struck the man unconscious with the pommel of his sword. Among the conspirators' possessions, the guards found a small vial of clear liquid that would later be identified as a deadly poison. If Elena had not recognized the nervous man from her cottage, the poison would likely have succeeded in killing the royal family. That evening, the harvest festival proceeded as planned, though with greatly increased security that most guests never noticed. King Edmund gave his traditional speech from the great balcony, looking out over hundreds of happy subjects celebrating another year of prosperity and peace. After the evening feast, King Edmund requested a private audience with Elena and her family. In the royal chambers, the king knelt before the little girl and spoke to her with genuine gratitude. Elena, you have shown courage and loyalty that would be remarkable in an adult, and is truly extraordinary in someone so young. You have not only saved my life, but the lives of my entire family. Elena looked at the king with wide eyes, overwhelmed by the grandeur of meeting the ruler of the realm in person. Your Majesty, she said in a small voice, I just didn't want anyone to get hurt. And, because of your bravery, no one was hurt. Your actions have protected the entire kingdom. King Edmund stood and addressed Elena's parents. Robert, Anna, you have raised a daughter of remarkable character. I want to ensure that your family is properly rewarded for the service Elena has performed. Your Majesty, we need no reward, Robert replied humbly. We're just grateful that everything worked out safely. Nevertheless, I insist. Your farm will be exempted from taxes for the next 10 years, and I am establishing a fund to ensure that Elena receives the finest education available. When she comes of age, if she wishes, there will be a place for her in the royal court. Elena looked up at her parents with excitement. The prospect of learning to read and write, and perhaps even studying at the Royal Academy, was beyond her wildest dreams. King Edmund then turned to Marcus, who had been standing quietly at attention throughout the audience. Captain Blackwood, your decision to abandon your post to investigate Elena's warning showed exactly the kind of judgment and loyalty that I value in my guards. You understood that sometimes the spirit of duty is more important than the letter of regulations. Thank you, Your Majesty. I am promoting you to the rank of commander, with responsibility for training new guards and the importance of thinking independently when circumstances require it. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the unexpected promotion. In 12 years of service, he had never imagined rising to such a position. Your Majesty, I am deeply honored. You have earned it, Commander Blackwood. And, I want you to know that Elena has specifically requested that you be allowed to visit her family whenever your duties permit. Marcus looked down at Elena, who was smiling up at him with those remarkable sapphire eyes that had first alerted him that something was wrong. I would be honored to maintain that friendship, Your Majesty. As the royal audience concluded and Elena's family was escorted to comfortable guest quarters for the night, Marcus reflected on the extraordinary events of the past few days. A little girl's courage had saved a kingdom, and a guard's decision to put principle above protocol had helped ensure that her warning was heard. The next morning, Marcus took up his new duties as commander of training, but not before making one final visit to Elena before her family returned to their farm. Elena, you taught me something very important, he told her as they sat in the palace garden where he had first found her crying. What did I teach you? She asked curiously. You taught me that sometimes the most important duties are the ones that aren't written in any book of rules. Sometimes we have to listen to our hearts and do what we know is right, even if it means taking risks. Elena smiled. My papa always told me that good people help each other, no matter what. Your papa is a wise man. And, you are a very special little girl who grew up to be a hero. As Elena's family prepared to return home, they carried with them not only the king's gratitude and rewards, but also the knowledge that their youngest member had changed the course of history. Elena would indeed receive the finest education, and she would grow up to become one of the most trusted advisors in the royal court. Marcus, now Commander Marcus, would often think back to that autumn morning when he first heard a child crying by the garden wall. That moment of decision to abandon his post and investigate had led to one of the most important events of his life. Years later, when training new guards, he would tell them Elena's story as an example of how ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they had the courage to act on their principles. He would remind them that loyalty to the crown meant more than just following orders, it meant protecting the ideals and people that made the kingdom worth defending. The Harvest Festival became an annual celebration not just of the year's bounty, but of the reminder that heroes come in all ages and sizes. And, every year, King Edmund would raise a toast to the little girl with sapphire eyes who saved a kingdom. Elena's courage had indeed changed everything, proving that sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important messages, and that doing the right thing, even when it's difficult or dangerous, can make all the difference in the world.